So I just finished watching the first video that I made, and I realized there were a lot of things that I didn't cover in that. I've decided I'm actually gonna try to make this educational in terms of like, I have no idea how many people are gonna watch this, maybe 10. But even if you do have questions, feel free to ask them and I will thoroughly look into it and answer it if I don't know. If I do know, I'll just make sure to answer it to the best of my abilities. But I'm making this really because I do think that more people should be educated in this, and I'm willing to help make that happen. Now, after watching my first video, I made a long list of things that I didn't really get into that I wanted to, because I have really bad anxiety, and even just talking to a phone is like, I'm just thinking of the people that could be watching and it freaks me out, so I kind of have mind blanks. So I actually made a list this time, and it's basically about the struggles of epilepsy and being an epileptic, especially for me, that I want to get more into. So starting is the faking. I am still to this day convinced that every single seizure that I've ever had was faked. I am convinced that I faked them, and me telling you this, I know that I have epilepsy, but I really do feel like I've never had a real seizure. I physically convinced myself that my epilepsy is all just in my head, that all of it was fake. And like, being logical, I know that's not true, but I physically cannot process it. And that's another issue, is processing things is very difficult. Some things just never click to me, or they click and then they just don't anymore. Even really exciting things just sometimes don't matter to me because it doesn't quite process that they're exciting, and it sucks, it's brain issues, and I'm never gonna fix that, but that's just like the first thing. Another big issue with epileptics and just people in general is medications. Basically all of us have to be on meds, and some of us get off of them, some of us don't. But they are the worst. I mean, like, I'm gonna cross things off as I mention them. My meds completely destroyed my gastrointestinal system. I have trouble digesting food. Certain foods make me sick when I eat them. And it's just, taking meds every single day for years on end does play a toll on you. And these meds not only physically, but mentally, they make you feel groggy, they can make you emotional, they can cause depression, they can cause anxiety. One of the weirdest things about seizure medications is they can cause seizures. It's either it's gonna work or it's gonna make it worse. And the first medication I was actually on sort of had that adverse effect where it just didn't work. The medications I've been on were Keppra, then I went to Trileptal, and now I'm on Vimpat. But there are so many different meds out there that just, some people have to mix them, and they can just cause a lot of issues, and that's a big struggle. And not only the effects they have, but sometimes if you don't have insurance, they can get really pricey, and that's just another thing. Another big thing is mental health. My epilepsy stems in my temporal lobe, which is like somewhere over here, and it is where memory is located, mental health, and I've been told by countless people that I'm crazy. I literally cannot remember anything to save my life. My long-term memory is shot. I remember clearly maybe about 3 days in the past, and then it gets foggy, and then as time goes on, I remember less and less and less. It's very hard for me to turn new things into memories, and I don't remember any of my childhood, really, just brief memories that I've been told. and things that sort of got changed in my mind over the years because I don't actually remember the event. I remember the memory. And it's very difficult to deal with that kind of thing. And then with that, as I said, also comes the mental health. And I have very severe depression that can't be fixed with meds. You know, my brain is screwed up and the meds don't really help with that. As I said, certain things don't process to me, so I either completely underreact to things that I really should be excited about, or the opposite side of the spectrum is the smallest thing could bother me and I will completely overreact to it. Absolutely insanely overreact. Like very, very small things, like a person, you know, in COVID times wearing their mask inside out, like that really bothers me, and I will fixate on something like that even though I really shouldn't. And like I said, I've been called crazy by numerous people because of the way I act. And when I do start overreacting, typically that causes my epilepsy to act up. And then that's when, you know, the epilepsy kicks in and things start getting worse because I start having these auras. And as my epilepsy gets worse, it's almost as if I de-age. And the closer and closer I get to, I guess, having a seizure, the more childish I act. And sometimes I just act really childish. I have really bad comprehension of boundaries. I act very immature sometimes. And like, I know that it's wrong, but in the moment I really don't realize it. And that also plays into like my jobs that I've had and stuff. I have a hard time making friends because I talk about my epilepsy first and foremost, and I don't know when to shut up about it, and typically it freaks people out. And I've actually not lost 3 jobs. I lost 2 jobs and left another job because of my epilepsy, and I will gladly get into the details about that. The first job I had a seizure while I was working. I got sent home, was whatever, I was 16, and then I ended up coming back, had another seizure, and this was when I had been seizure free when I got the job. And so I had another seizure, and this was in December of 2018. At the beginning of the month, they told me I just needed a doctor's note to come back to work and they would start scheduling me again. I had a doctor's note by the beginning of January of 2019. I checked the schedule every single week, and come March, they still hadn't scheduled me. I had given them my doctor's note. I had given them what they needed for me to return to work, and they stopped scheduling me. They didn't fire me, so I ended up having to quit, so there were no benefits involved or anything, no unemployment. But I ended up losing my job because of that, and you know, I never took legal action because I was 16 and that kind of scared me. But moving on, it made it very difficult for me to find a job because I then had to tell people who invited me in for interviews about that experience. And even though you're not allowed to discriminate because of epilepsy, they still do. I applied down the road at a store where they said I applied and he really liked me, and then I mentioned I had epilepsy, and things kind of changed, and I called him back every single day to ask about the status of my application, and it was always an I'll call you back, and then finally he got back to me and he was like, I just don't think you're qualified enough for this position. It was a position at a gas station, so retail. There was food service in there too, and I had both experience in retail and food service, and he said I didn't have enough experience to have the job. I went back maybe a month later and someone was working and they gave me incorrect change and apologized, and I had asked if they had like if this was their first job or something along the lines of that, and they were like, yeah. So even though I didn't have enough experience, this person who had their first job did. And you know, there were multiple jobs that I didn't get because of my epilepsy, but The second job I had, I was working a seasonal position, and I had only missed, I think, 2 days. And that was because I was in the hospital, because I was so sick, because my medication screwed up my intestinal system and I could not keep food down. I was like, I'm 5'10", I weighed like 123 pounds, they had a feeding tube in, like I was very sick, and I missed work because of that, because I was in the hospital. And I returned the day after I got out of the hospital on Black Friday to a commercial store. I won't say the name of the store, but a commercial store on Black Friday, and worked a shift that day. Right after I got out of the hospital, I showed up for all my shifts, and they still laid me off at the end of the season, but they said that they would keep the team members that were doing good, and they laid me off due to my attendance issues, and the only days I missed were the days I was in the hospital. My third job, I had an episode at work. I didn't have a seizure, but I started like panicking because I was super stressed. It was an absolutely horrible job. And basically the manager at the time, she messaged me and she was like, if you can't handle this job, we might just have to cut back your hours. And I was like, I can handle this job. Today was just a particularly stressful day. Like, I can handle everything this job has to offer, and I do not need you to cut back my hours because of my health conditions. That is not an accommodation I'm asking you to make, so don't make it, you know. And slowly she started cutting back my hours. She talked poorly about me to all my team members. She was just very rude. She was a horrible manager. And this was the food service job, so obviously, you know, I could handle it. You know, it's not like I was working on heavy machinery or anything. And she cut back my hours more and more, to the point where I'm working 11 hours a week, and she's giving me a hard time. I ended up having another episode, and she was like, she basically said she can't, I asked her if I could just get more hours, because she refused to train me to make me a supervisor, even though I was perfectly capable of it. She just wouldn't teach me the paperwork that I needed to know. And I kept asking her, and she basically said, I can't help you do this if you can't handle this due to your health issues. And she blatantly said, like, due to your health issues. And I wasn't asking her to. And I took this, I wasn't 16 anymore. This was this past year. So I took this to the EEOC and I started a lawsuit. And I ended up getting her fired because she cut all of my hours. You know, I was getting like $110 a week for this job. You know, I'm trying to save up money and I'm barely getting paid because she wouldn't schedule me. She was talking poorly about me, and I had coworkers back me up on it. She ended up losing her job, but that job made me miserable after that, so I ended up leaving, and now I actually have a really great job, and you know, the manager I have is awesome and all that, and everything is great now. But I've had some bad experiences in the past, and I really veered into that story. But a very big issue with epileptics is both school and work, because public places just don't typically go with epilepsy, and I just wanted to get into that. The next issue would be driving. A lot of epileptics can never drive. You have to be a certain amount of time without having a seizure to even be able to get your permit and be able to drive, and a lot of people can't do that. And then there's always the people who are like, is it safe for you to drive? I don't trust you driving, all that. And it was a struggle. I was so ready to get my permit and my license. I was on it. I completely like put in all the effort. I managed to get my license within 3 months, and one of those months I had gone on vacation for 2 weeks and had to quarantine for 2 weeks. So basically, in the span of 2 months, I managed to get driving lessons and passed my road test on my first try, and I was just so happy about it. But it was such a big struggle because, you know, being 18 years old, it's so hard to even if you find a job, to find transportation to it. And it's just such a big issue, and a lot of people don't realize it. And before you start judging people because they can't drive, you know, even if it's not epilepsy, really, like, maybe ask about it, but don't judge, because I know I definitely, like, had so many people talk to me about it, and they were just like, well, why don't you just get your license already? And they physically don't realize that I can't, and certain people can't do that. And that was just, it was a very sad thing watching everyone around me get their license around my age and just sitting back and watching. But, you know, eventually I ended up getting it, but I just wanted to cover that quickly. The next thing I have is the questions that we get asked. Please be considerate when you ask questions, because I've had so many people ask such rude questions and they don't even realize it. The biggest one that I don't understand is I've been asked, and people that I know who are epileptic have been asked, are seizures fun? Is epilepsy fun? What's it feel like to have a seizure? Is epilepsy contagious? It's like, I don't know the answer to the first questions I asked, and the last question is no, epilepsy is not contagious. I'm not going to sneeze on you and you're going to start having a seizure. Like, people, this also leads into miseducation. Like, a lot of people ask a lot of really horrible questions, and it's just really just watch what you say, because sometimes it's just so obnoxious to hear this sort of stuff, and you know, you're so forced to answer it. And like I said, I'm willing to answer any questions that anyone has to ask, but I can tell you right now, having a seizure, not fun. I don't remember the other questions I asked. Oh, having epilepsy, also not fun. And yeah, whatever else I asked, like I said, memory issues, but it's just questions, really watch what you say, because I even had friends get pissed off because people have asked me about my epilepsy. It's like, this is why I don't like telling people I have epilepsy. People get scared, people make fun of it, and it's like, I get scared to tell people I have it, but I have to tell them I have it. And I've lost so many friends because of it, so many relationships. That's actually on here is so many people just up and left because it's just too difficult to deal with, and they don't take into consideration that, like, I'm dealing with it too, and I can guarantee my end of things is a lot more difficult than the people standing by. And I'm not saying it's not difficult for the bystanders. I know it definitely is, but I've had a lot of people just leave because they couldn't handle it, or they didn't want to, or I was too much for them, and it sucks. But moving on from that, as I mentioned, is miseducation. I said this in my last video, but like, people really do not know about seizures, or what they are, or even that there are different kinds of seizures. People don't realize how common epilepsy is. People don't realize that anyone can have epilepsy. Like, I've had people tell me that I don't look epileptic, and I don't even know what that means. I don't know what it means to look epileptic, but so many people just don't know what they're talking about, and the worst is when they try to pretend that they do. And they try to pretend that they do know what they're talking about, and when I try to educate them, they're just like, no. What I'm saying is what I believe. And it's so hard to deal with. The next thing I want to talk about is I needed an aid for everything. I needed one walking around school. When I went out in public, I would need someone with me to make sure I was okay. And it was just, you always need someone with you, and you know, you don't really have that sense of freedom that a normal person would have, especially growing up and dealing with this. Sorry, there's something in my throat, but it's so hard dealing with this and having someone constantly breathing down your neck. You really don't feel free, and sometimes you got to take that into consideration as well, that if a person has a chance to be left alone, then maybe ask before you start pushing and asking all these questions and all that. The next thing I have here is hospitals. I have an epileptic friend who I'm not going to say the name of because I don't know if they want to be mentioned, but we joke around about this one hospital as our second home. Epileptics are so familiar with hospitals and doctors' offices because of all the tests and everything that we have to get done, and all the times people have called 911 on us and all that. And it's the worst having that bright orange band on your wrist that says fall risk, and always having to have someone with you. You have no idea how embarrassing it is to be in a hospital and have to have someone come in the bathroom with you while you're using it, just because you might end up hurting yourself if they're not in there. And it's everything is just so difficult, and there's so much that we go through that people don't realize, and it really is an invisible illness, but it really should be, as I keep saying, educated more. The next thing I have here is the side effects. So basically, there are a lot of things that happen in my everyday life that wouldn't normally happen to me. I randomly twitch. Sometimes my hearing gets like super sensitive. I can hear the electricity in the walls. I can't explain it, but it's like very mind-boggling to me because it's just so crazy to explain, but any epileptic would understand what I'm saying. Loud noises and bright lights and all that, if they're too sudden, they will bother me and they'll make me daze. And that's another thing, is disassociation. Sometimes I'll just be doing something and then just completely lose my train of thought. Completely disassociate with my body for a second before I come back to it. I get very excessive anxiety and depression for no reason. Sometimes I will just randomly start crying for no reason whatsoever, just because the slightest thing bothered me and there was no backstory to it. Another thing is tics. I'll randomly make weird noises or move a certain part of my body or say something that, you know, I don't mean to do. It just sort of happens. And obviously that's most common in Tourette's, but we also deal with that, and a lot of people don't realize that as well, and people will judge us for that. Next is the physical part of it. Obviously a big one is memory loss. After you have a seizure, you can't remember anything. There's just a complete memory lapse. You don't really know what's going on, and all of your memory is gone. You forget how to talk, all of that. Following up, you get really bad migraines after you have one, like very, very bad ones. You just want to sleep all day. Another thing I have here, I just had to realize what it meant, is we bite up the inside of our cheeks. Like my cheeks are covered in scar tissue because how much I bit them while I was sleeping and having seizures and all of that. Another thing is we will randomly find cuts and bruises on our body and not even be alarmed because we're just like, I don't know how I got that, but it's normal to me, you know. One time I was rollerblading and I had a seizure while I was rollerblading, and I just had this massive scab just all down my forehead because I just like face planted, and it was like crazy, and walking around it was so embarrassing, but like I couldn't do anything about it. It was normal to me. And then, like I said, another big thing is zoning. We will just stare. And some of it could be seizures for certain people, but another thing is just we lose our train of thought and we will just glance, and no real thing that we're staring at, and it typically, for me at least, it takes someone snapping me out of it. The next thing I have is not being able to do everyday things. like I said, the whole rollerblading thing. I love rollerblading, but for the longest time I couldn't play my flute, as I mentioned in the previous video. Going into public places is just super stressful because you never know if you're gonna have a seizure, and it's the worst because when you have a seizure, people just automatically crowd around you, and it's just so scary waking up to just a bunch of people around you asking questions. And I had a few good friends who would be like, please leave, everything's okay, this is normal for her, just leave her be. But just waking up to that is just very horrible. You can't do the things that you normally would want to do because you're afraid it's going to get ruined. Next thing I have is random auras. Randomly throughout the day, I will just get this intense feeling of fear and deja vu, and it's a feeling you get before you have a seizure, and it's so impossible to explain, but any epileptic watching this probably knows what I'm talking about, if any epileptics are watching this. But it's so absolutely horrible. It's worse than the seizure itself, because like leading up to it, there's nothing you can do to stop it, and you never know, is this gonna be the one that turns into a seizure, you know? It's just so horrible. And then another thing is, as I said previously, my seizures happened while I was sleeping, and to this day I looked it up, and it's actually common. I have dreams that I have seizures. Like, I'll be having a seizure in the dream that I'm having, and I just wake up and I'm like, did I actually have a seizure? Was that real? And it just feels so intense. And to this day, I still don't know if I'm having seizures when I'm sleeping, if it's just seizure activity, or what's happening. But it's just very scary to deal with, especially on a daily basis. And that was my next one. It's just a constant fear. You never know if for some reason you could just randomly drop and have a seizure. Every epileptic, at least that I've talked to and heard from, is so scared that at any given moment you could just have one, and you don't know when, you don't know where, you don't know if it's ever going to happen again, but that fear is always in the back of your mind. The next one is kind of not related to this, but it's just feeling horrible. With epilepsy, you just constantly feel like crap. Like, I constantly feel like garbage. I constantly feel sick. I'm constantly exhausted. And it's my normal. So when I have a good day and I'm feeling great, I feel on top of the world, because constantly I just feel like something is wrong. I went to the doctor one time, and basically I didn't feel right, and they were testing me, and they were like, well, you don't have mono now, but you did have mono recently, did you know that? And I was just like, no. I felt absolutely completely normal, and I had mono and I didn't even know, because that's just my normal. That's how exhausted I constantly feel. And I just get sick so often, and I don't even know. It's just very difficult to deal with, and I don't even know, like, that's just how I feel. Moving on to the next one is losing control of actions. Like I said, you get random tics, and sometimes you just impulsively do things that you can't explain, especially out of like anger or fear. It's just people who are epileptic, or at least me and certain people that I've talked to, are very impulsive. You know, you just do something because you want to, and sometimes it causes really big issues in relationships and everyday life, and just certain things that are like out of other people's control, sometimes out of your control, can happen because of it, and it's just very stressful to deal with. The next thing I have is about school. It's back to my school nurses. They, as I mentioned, they were absolutely horrible. At my 9th grade school, my nurse was absolutely amazing. She kept the most detailed notes on my seizures. She sent them to my neurologist, but my high school that I went to for the majority of high school, my school nurses were horrible. That, putting it bluntly, I could make an entire video on how horrible they were. They never took me seriously, ever. They were just like, go back to class, you're fine. If I was feeling off, they didn't care. They were like, just go back to class. I had an IEP, which is another thing I have here, which basically it was for my epilepsy to help make things more to my accommodation. And even getting one was so difficult because like I didn't meet any requirements and it was just so hard to even get one. And I finally got one in place, and these nurses did not care about it. Like, part of it was when there was a fire drill, they were to let me know ahead of time because the noises were so loud they would cause me to have seizures, and they never told me. There would be a fire drill, and every single time I would be on the ground because I had a seizure, and they would just get pissed. Anytime they had to pick me up, they would be pissed. They didn't take it seriously. They stopped rushing to like get me and everything. It was just I'm going to pick up Serenity, you know. A nurse actually ended up getting fired. I believe it was because of it, but because she came to pick me up in a classroom and she was giving me attitude, she sighed, she was not taking it seriously at all, and the teacher was in the room, and the teacher loved me. I loved the teacher. And she said something because this nurse was not taking her job seriously. Even though, you know, she was used to me having seizures, every time I had a seizure was supposed to be equally as important, and she did not make it that way. And it was just so horrible. The nurses there did not do their jobs, and it made it horrible for me. And like I said, I ended up actually leaving high school because they just did not accommodate for me the way that they should have. The next thing I have is like it being in public. I mentioned it, waking up to crowds was so horrible, and then waking up and people asking, should I call an ambulance, you know, all of that is just so overwhelming, especially when a person is just coming out of a seizure. They don't know what's going on, and you bombarding them with all this stuff is just so stressful, and having to get into an ambulance and all that, it's so much. And you know, it's something that we just have to deal with, but I wish we didn't. And the last thing that I have on here that I'm going to say before I end this is just being afraid of basically everything. Everything you do is a what if, because anything could end with a seizure, and it's just very stressful, especially because so many people aren't educated that if you have one, you don't know if someone's going to do the right or wrong thing. Like, the reason you're supposed to turn someone on their side is because they can make themselves throw up while they're having a seizure, and you can choke and die. If someone does the wrong thing when you're having a seizure and you're all alone, things could end badly, and you could wake up either not the same person you were, or you could not wake up at all. That's something called SUDEP, which is sudden unexplained death in epilepsy. And that's another fear, is you can just have a seizure that you don't wake up from. And that's something that all of us have to be scared of. All of this is always going to be a risk for us. There is no cure, and it's just very scary to live with something like this, because I know that in my lifetime, there's really not going to be anything that can happen to fix it. And even just talking about this makes me feel better, because at least the 1 or 2 people watching this will understand what I'm going through and maybe tell someone else. But it is a struggle dealing with this, and I do appreciate whoever is watching this to learn more.